The whole idea of an integrated bracelet sports watch is an interesting one because it involves integrating two things that are seemingly disconnected with each other completely. One is the concept of a watch as an elegant object, and the other is the concept of a watch as well as a sports object, for lack of a better word. And you put those things together, and you end up with watches like, let's say the Royal Oak, the Patek Philippe Nautilus, the Girard-Perregaux Laureato, and of course, the subject of today's Week on the Wrist, the Vacheron Constantin 222. The 222, although it looks like it was designed by Girard, was actually designed by a very young Jörg Heisek. And while it certainly owes a certain amount to the Nautilus and to, of course, the Royal Oak in terms of influence, I feel that it very much stands on its own as a design. The integrated bracelet with its elongated hexagonal center links, the scalloped bezel, the arrangement of the hands, the design of the markers, these are all things that really set it apart from all of the other integrated bracelet luxury sports watches of the time and which continue to set it apart today. The 222 didn't really become as big a part of the conversation at the time about luxury sports watches as you might think. It was produced in very small numbers, I think about 500 in stainless steel, about 150 in gold, and less than 50 in two-tone. It was not produced for a particularly long period of time, and there was no follow-up to it. And that's one of the big things that distinguishes the 222 from other integrated bracelet luxury watches. The Patek Nautilus has been around in one form or another since 1976. The Royal Oak has been around and in increasingly wide numbers of models ever since 1972. But the narrative of the 222 really stopped when the original model went out of production. And the narrative of the 222 didn't really start again until this year, 2022, when the watch was reintroduced at Watches and Wonders Geneva. I had an opportunity to compare the original Vacheron 222 with the modern 222 with the reissue. And I have to say at first glance, and even second or third glance, it's really, really difficult to tell the two watches apart. The dimensions are the same. The case material is the same, of course, 18 karat yellow gold in both cases. One place where you do notice a difference, or where I noticed a difference, was in the construction of the bracelet and the clasp. The bracelet on the modern 222 has a kind of combination of pleasant weight and wonderful suppleness, almost as if you had a friendly anaconda wrapped around your wrist. The only other major difference between the two watches is one that you're not going to notice when you have either of them strapped on the wrist. The original 222 used the Vacheron caliber 1120, which is an ultra-thin version of the same movement that Audemars Piguet used in the first Royal Oak and that Patek Philippe used in the first Nautilus. Ideologically speaking, I would have loved it if they had used it in the new 222. However, it is at this point a legacy movement, and while it's beautifully made, beautifully thought out, beautifully laid out, and beautifully finished, there is no doubt that the 2455 is simply a more robust, probably more precise, and certainly a more durable caliber overall, I think. So, what's it like to wear a watch like this, a very, very elevated, in precious metal, luxury sports watch for a week? Well, it certainly made me wish I could wear it for longer than a week. There were a lot of little details that I didn't notice specifically when I first inspected the watch in Geneva that I had time to appreciate while I had the watch on the wrist over the last 7 or so days. For instance, that lovely little contrasting white-gold Maltese cross. It makes a difference in the visual experience of the watch. The design of the indexes and the design of the hands exactly replicates the design of the hands and indexes on the original. The original, and this is another difference, used tritium for the markers, and the new watch uses superluminova. And the nice thing about superluminova is that unlike tritium, it doesn't gradually fade over time. Personally, I'm going through kind of a funny period in my appreciation of watches because I seem to be going through a gold phase, and I wasn't expecting that to happen in particular. The degree to which you appreciate an integrated bracelet luxury sports watch made in a precious metal is sort of a combination of a bunch of different factors. And at the most fundamental level, you are aware that you are wearing a pretty hefty chunk of gold that costs a pretty hefty chunk of change. And the mass is absolutely palpable. It kind of, I like thinking about the fact that heavy metals are forged by neutron star collisions. So it takes an extremely violent celestial event in order to produce these heavy atoms. So I think about that. You might not, probably most people don't. I might be the only one. But I like thinking about that when I look at a gold watch. And the primal sort of hindbrain, upper spinal cord appeal of gold is definitely a big part of the appeal of these watches. Now, it's not the only part. The design has to be something that takes advantage of the special properties of gold. Without the careful alternation between brushed and polished surfaces, the polish of the bezel, and the very, very, very delicate, highly polished edges on the case and the bracelet, it would simply be just an inert hunk of precious metal, an inert hunk of metal, albeit precious. And it takes an awful lot of skill in both design and in the manual execution of polishing in order to make gold feel like gold. The Vacheron Constantin 222 is, to me, an example of a classic luxury play. It's obviously a very expensive watch, and it's obviously an object like the Bentley for which no effort has been spared in terms of creating something designed to appeal as much to the senses as to the intellect. However, it doesn't really draw attention to itself in any kind of an overt way. It waits to impress you until you've actually noticed it. And when you do notice it, there's an awful lot to love. It's one of the most beautifully dignified, balanced, and pleasurable to wear watches that I've ever had an opportunity to experience. Who will buy me one? Anyone? Anybody?